Okay, I've got 10 o'clock on my clock, and so we'll go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. We've got a great crowd today. Elections, especially in a pandemic, they're usually pretty complicated in normal times. And so we appreciate the clerks, not only those of you who signed on to participate and watch, but our four clerks who are on here. And we will start with our chief elections official in the state. A few things we want to go over just real quick. I know Jody went over a few of the do's and don'ts. If your feed gets interrupted during any point, you can just go back and log back in, log out and log back in if you need to. You can ask a question the old-fashioned way. You can raise your hand and we'll see you on the screen. You can go to the chat as well if you want to do that. And then the best way to watch this is in speaker mode. So you can go to the top right-hand corner of your screen and choose speaker view. And that way you'll just see the speaker. It might be easier to watch that and focus on that. And then we'll get through this. I'm going to do some introductions of each of the guests that we have today pretty briefly so that we can maximize our time to hear what they have to say with us. We'll take some breaks in between speakers so that you all can either go off video, do what you need to do. But at any time, this is just if you need to step away, just be sure and keep yourself muted unless you get called on to ask a question so that we can hear the speaker. The microphone picks up whoever is talking the loudest. So we appreciate everybody's participation with that. And we'll get started. Our first speaker today is Secretary of State Michael Adams. Secretary Adams was just elected last November. Went to the University of Louisville for his bachelor's, Harvard Law School, clerked for U.S. District Judge, went to Washington to serve as counsel to the U.S. Deputy Attorney General in the second Bush administration. Governor Bevin appointed him to the State Board of Elections when he was governor, and he is married to Christina and father of Lucia. So Secretary Adams, we are thrilled and honored to have you here today. We'll get some comments from you, and then when you're finished, we'll open it up to some questions. So I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you, Shelley. Thank everybody for joining today. I'm sorry this can't be in person. I made a trip over to Keiko the week after I was elected to visit, and look forward to meeting you all in person again one of these days soon. Let me start with this. I think that our primary in June worked well, and in agreement with me on that point is pretty much everybody else in America. We drew national praise for our competence, our diligence in running the election in the primary. It wasn't easy. Our clerks worked really, really hard. Some of them worked 24 hours a day in 12-hour shifts, processing these absentee ballots, but we got it done. The expectations for us were low, but after we completed our election, we were the envy of the country. Think of all the things Kentucky is 46th or 47th in. We're perceived as being number one in elections this year through the hard work of my team, the State Board of Elections, the governor's assistants, and of course on the ground, our frontline workers, the county clerks. So I want to thank all of you, all county officials, and especially the clerks for making us look good across the rest of the country. I was cautiously optimistic that the primary would go smoothly, more cautious than optimistic. I'm more optimistic about the general election than I was about the primary, even though we anticipate the turnout being 2.5 times what we had back on the primary. We've had more time to prepare this time. We've put in place a plan I think that's very workable, and we've been through this before. So I think what I'll do is tell you what's changed from June to November, and I'll make sure I leave plenty of time for feedback and questions. So what's changed? Well, what hasn't changed, of course, is we've kept the 4 options to vote. It's never been easier to vote. Not in Kentucky history ever has it ever been easier to vote than it is in 2020. There are 4 ways to do so. Same 4 options every voter had back in the primary. You can vote by showing up and voting in person on November 3rd. There are going to be more locations available on November 3rd than there were on June 23rd. It won't be every precinct. That's not feasible. A lot of our precincts are nursing homes. Obviously, they're closed this year to the public, but we're going to have a lot more locations open. The counties have been producing plans for my review and the governor's review. I've approved, I think, about 75 of 120 plans. I've got some I haven't received yet and a couple that we're still working on. That's one big difference from the primary is this time I get a voice in that process, as does the governor. So he's approved most of these. I've sent over to him. He's still looking at some. We'd like to get all these off our plate in the next week or so if we can. But you're going to see much more robust in-person voting location options in the general election. We have to. We're going to have a lot more voters. So the first way to vote is to vote in person on November 3rd. The second way to vote is the way I'm going to vote, which is to vote in person before November 3rd. I'm going to strongly encourage voters to do that. I'm going to strongly encourage you all to encourage your voters to do that. And here's why. If we put too much strain on the absentee part of our system, it'll crash. If we put too much strain on in-person voting on one day in a 12-hour span, it'll crash. That's why we have 3 weeks of in-person voting instead of one day. 3 weeks. So starting October 13th, every county will offer at least one location for in-person voting. That will be no excuse required voting. That will be no appointment required voting. It'll be the same experience on October 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th as it would be on November 3rd. Show up and vote. We're going to have 3 weeks of early voting all day during business hours on weekdays. We're also mandating at least half a day on Saturdays. Some clerks are doing more than that. Saturday hours. Again, it's never been more convenient in Kentucky history to cast your ballot. We're doing this so we can take the pressure off other parts of our system and ensure that everyone gets to vote, but we also ensure social distancing and don't overload any other part of our process. So first 2 ways to vote are in person on November 3rd, in person for 3 weeks before November 3rd. The third way you can vote is to vote absentee ballot by drop box. We spent about $600,000 here in Frankfort providing drop boxes to the county clerks. These things are like tanks. They're very expensive. They're about $2,000 a piece, but they're like tanks. They're like mailboxes on steroids. You can't blow them up. You can't put stuff in them. They're impenetrable. These things are really amazing, and they've really been welcomed by voters of all political persuasions this year. This is sort of a hybrid model of absentee and in person. You have the convenience of voting at home instead of having to go out if you're concerned about your health. But at the same time, you can drop that ballot off in the drop box instead of having to rely on the postal service. If you want the personal satisfaction of dropping your ballot in the bin and knowing your clerk got it and will count it, you can use the drop box. It's proved very popular with both parties. Fourth way to vote, of course, is absentee ballot by mail. We send you your absentee ballot and you fill it out, and then you put it back in the envelope and mail it to your county clerk. We're paying for your postage. There's no stamp required. We're eating that. We've budgeted about $4 million just for postage. That's the biggest cost of this election. So I encourage people, if they can just bring it back and save us the postage, then do that. But in any event, we'll certainly take these if they're mailed back to us. A quick word about absentee ballots. I know there's been in the primary and in the general some concern about those. To be very clear, what the president has criticized is not what we're doing. He's actually praised what we're doing quite explicitly. The mail-in voting that he's criticized is what the West Coast does, where they register you to vote without your prior consent, and then they mail you a ballot you didn't ask for. You can see why that would be a little dubious. We're not doing that in Kentucky. We never have. But we have had absentee voting as an option for elderly voters, for ill voters. It's been in our books for decades. I voted absentee in my very first election in 1994 when I went off to school. I wanted to vote in Paducah, and I voted absentee. I've been voting absentee for 26 years. It's been in our state constitution since 1945. The right to vote at the polls has been in there a long time. We're going to open up the polls, but the right to vote absentee is in the Constitution too. I took an oath to the whole Constitution. We're making that available. We didn't have to change the law on this. This is already Kentucky law. If you're old, if you're sick, and by the way, this is your subjective decision. I don't decide whether you're old enough or sick enough. You get to make this decision yourself. If you want to vote absentee, you can go to govoteky.com. It's the same website that we had for back in the primary. At govoteky.com, you can register to vote through October 5th at 4 p.m. That's the deadline. You can request an absentee ballot until October 9th at 11:59 p.m. That's the deadline. We have a deadline in place so we don't overload the clerks trying to do both absentee ballot processing plus early voting at the same time. We're doing this in stages to ease their burden. But October 9th is that deadline. Go to govoteky.com or call your clerk. I recommend the website for this reason. If you go to this website, it allows you to get into that system electronically so you can track your ballot. You can track your ballot, the clerk can track your ballot, so can I. It makes the processing much, much more convenient for the voter and for us, and allows me and Attorney General Cameron and others in law enforcement to monitor the election, monitor the ballots, make sure that they're going where they were supposed to go, make sure that we don't have lost or stolen ballots. So I highly encourage you to use the website if you can. You can register to vote there. You can request your ballot there. We do require an ID, but we're linked into the driver's license database, which helps. You can update your voter information. We have voters every year who show up at the wrong precinct or so forth because they've moved. If you need to update your information, you can do that at govoteky.com. You can track your ballot 24/7 the way you track a UPS package. You also can register to be a poll worker. It's the job of the county clerks to find poll workers, but it's been really hard this year for them for obvious reasons. I actually testified in the legislature last year before I was sworn in that we have a poll worker crisis in our state. That was before coronavirus. We've got an aging generation of poll workers, the greatest generation, the baby boomers. They're aging out. It's been accelerated by the pandemic, but they're aging out of availability, and we've got to find younger people. My generation, Generation X, has really got to step up. Younger generations, millennials, they're public spirited. They need to step up and help their communities. So we've done a lot through our office to recruit poll workers. We found about 4,500 ourselves of the 15,000 it would take to open up all the locations around the state. So that's a quick summary of where we are. The big changes for November, coming back to that, number one, we're going to have more places to vote. Number two, we're going to have more time to vote. And number three, the biggest complaint, of course, that I got was we want more places to vote. I get it. We're doing that. The second biggest complaint I got was people want to know who won the election on election night. We're going to be closer to that than we were in the primary. Every state that's voted since the spring with this pandemic, every single state has had to take at least a week to count their ballots, some of them longer. It took New York 2 months to count their ballots. They voted the same day we did. We had results in a week. They took 2 months. We're going to count the results a lot faster, and here's how. Two things. Number one, proportionately, many more of our voters are going to be casting their ballots in person. If you've got people voting in person, basically you push a button and you get your totals, and then you report them. That's why Kentucky historically is one of the first states in America to report their results on election night. We put our points up on the board on a presidential election night when the whole country is watching. We're usually either first or second. We are Indiana. So that's going to happen again, I think. We're going to be one of the first because, number one, more of our votes are going to be cast in person than absentee. And number two, because we're requiring the clerks to go ahead and process their absentee votes up through election day and report those on election night. It's not going to be all the votes, but we never actually have all the votes in election night. It always takes a few days to process all those returns prior to any certification. Of course, there's a period built in by law for recanvass requests and so forth. So we're actually on track to have the election over under the normal time period that it takes for us to finalize an election. The difference is election night, the unofficial results won't be 97 or 98%. They'll probably be 75%, 80%. That's still enough, though, for the Associated Press and others to project outcomes. So my guess is that we'll know who carried Kentucky for president, probably the Senate race, probably most of the legislative races and so forth. We're going to have, I believe, relatively final results on election night and give people some finality. So with that, I want to thank you again for your attention. And if you have feedback or questions, I'd love to hear it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Secretary Adams. And just a reminder, we put the link to Go Vote KY on the chat for anybody who needs to take advantage of that or share that on their social media feeds. I want to remind everybody to put your viewer on speaker view and make sure your screen stays on for your DLG credit. And I don't see any questions right now on the chat. Does anybody have a hand raised that has a question that would like to unmute? I don't see any hands up. just yet. Oh, I see one. Judge Vogel from Oldham County. Unmute.
Election responses from the June primary. Have they all been dispersed? Or maybe some counties have. We're still looking for our election reimbursement from the June primary.
Well, I don't have any control over that, unfortunately. Ben Chandler is the chair of the Board of Elections. I don't even get a vote on it. The board receives the federal funds. I apply for them, but the board receives them and the board allocates those. I'm happy to make a call on your behalf over to the board to talk with them frequently. But I just don't have any role in that, unfortunately, so I can't help you directly.
Okay. I mean, I think we submitted our voucher way back in July 21st. We're still sitting here. So.
Judge Vogel, the next speaker is the executive director of the State Board of Elections. So you might want to,
okay.
Yeah.
I'll bring it up again.
Yeah, absolutely. Good question. Do we have any other folks that want to ask a question of Secretary Adams?
Looks like Clerk Jones, I believe you have a question.
Okay, go ahead, unmute yourself.
Mr. Adams, I was wondering if we could push that when people are trying to register to vote, that they verify that they're not already registered, since they can do that on the same web page as well. We in our county, and I know I'm a small county, so I cannot imagine what these large counties are dealing with, but we are having so many people re-registered that are already registered and they're not changing anything. And so I think when we're pushing that, make sure you register to vote, we should push, make sure you're not already registered before you register.
I agree 100% with Naomi. This is a problem that we're having. It's creating more work for our clerks, duplicative work while they're trying to do all the other things that they have to do with elections, let alone all the other responsibilities they have. There's a lot of confusion right now, and it's largely attributable, unfortunately, to outside organizations that are pushing their own agendas. They're sending out registration encouragement by mail to people who are dead, who are children, who are pets. It's a mess. There's a group in DC called the Center for Voter Information, and they're engaged in this. The Attorney General and I sent out a scam alert about them last week. They're not the only group, though. There's other groups that are doing this. I'm all for voter registration. To comment on that for just a second, we've got a problem here, too. To put this into perspective, last year, when I was on the ballot, we had 19% turnout in the primary. We had 42% turnout in the general. And in the summer in between, we had 267,000 voters register. It's pretty good. This year, we had a 29% turnout in our primary, very high. We're going to have, I think, about 72% vote in November, very, very high. But we only had 21,000 voters register over the summer. 21,000. That's a drop of about roughly 90%. That's a big deal. People aren't being registered. It's no one's fault. It's COVID-19's fault. I can't go out and do voter registration drives. Normally, I would go to the state fair for a week and put up a booth and register folks to vote, but I couldn't. They closed that off. The parties, civic organizations, they're not able to, unfortunately, get people to register. They can't go out and do these group things and register folks. So that's a problem that we're seeing. On the other hand, we're seeing people register who are already registered. So I want to encourage people strongly, if you want to vote in this election, before you check any other box on that website, check your voter information. Make sure your name is right. Make sure your location is right, where you're supposed to vote, your address. Make sure all that's correct. Maybe your name has changed. Check all that out first, and make sure you're not already registered before you start to register again. Otherwise, it's going to complicate your life as well as your clerks.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good point. Good point, Naomi. Anybody else have a question for Secretary Adams or comment? Yes, Debbie, go right ahead.
Yes, Secretary Adams, I want to first say I think you're doing an excellent job.
Thank you.
With the early voting and all the opportunities that you're giving the voters. I very much appreciate that. And but the question was what she just asked on people what they're doing is changing their parties or changing their name or address. Could there be like a button that you put on there and just ask if you're changing? Because I went on there for someone and you're actually going through the whole scenario, and if maybe just a shortcut. But I just wanted to put that in. But my question is, and this may be a Jarad question, you all are going to help with advertising, is that correct?
Well, we're waiting for the governor to get back to us. We've requested $1 million for advertising. Obviously, we'll include the clerks in how we allocate that and the messaging and the media we choose and all that sort of thing. If we get the money, it's not something that we know for certain we're going to have. It's relatively speaking a luxury compared to the other costs that we know we're going to have, hard costs. We're putting county reimbursements well above advertising, but our goal is to get $1 million, and we're still working on that with the governor.
Okay, because I know, it's, we're coming down to the wire. And of course, several of us haven't been approved yet for our plan. And so I just wanted to ask that. And my plan, I had talked with Heather Quinn yesterday, and I told her if I had to add precincts, I was going to need more e-poll books and more privacy screens. And she did say that I would need to talk to Jarad about that.
Sure. Let me add this. In my month or so of negotiations with the governor for November, we worked out different things that we disagreed on, and we came up with a good plan. But one thing that was never an issue is funding. He always assured me that whatever we needed, we would be able to get it. And to give him credit here on this too, he was very dubious of in-person voting for the primary. Ultimately, I was able to get him to allow that for everyone without an excuse for the primary. And we proved that it worked. We proved that you can have in-person voting without spreading COVID. People can vote safely. We kept our poll workers safe and our voters safe. And so one of the things the governor was really pleased about with that outcome is that we've shown that we can do every part of this well, including in-person voting safely. So he's not as resistant now as he was back in, say, April, when we were on total lockdown. Obviously, he was concerned about people leaving their homes at that point for any purpose that was an emergency. So he's committed to me that we'll have funding for everything that we need. Obviously, we're sensitive to the fact that we're running out of federal funds, and that means the state's going to have to chip in. And he's got other things to worry about right now with funding. Our revenue's taken a drop, but he's always committed to me that if you need this, we'll make sure that we get it, and I trust him.
Okay. Thank you, and thank you again for the job that you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Does anyone else have a question for Secretary Adams? I have one, Secretary. If you could speak to some of the outreach efforts that you've done to try to educate. I know there are some liquid refreshments involved in that. If you could maybe review some of that for anybody that hasn't seen it.
Oh, thanks. So we've got a few problems. One of them, I tell people all the time, the thing that keeps me up at night is not vote fraud or vote suppression or Russia. It's getting information out to the public. It's very hard to do that right now. It's very hard for me to travel the state and meet with people. I spent 21 months doing that in a campaign. That's why I'm here. But I can't do that now. I've only been out of the office, I think, 10 times since I was sworn in. I'm kind of stuck in the bubble. It's hard for me to get out and meet with people because they're not holding events. This is a great example. So I'm very reliant on Zooms. I'm very reliant on opportunities like this to virtually meet with people and hope that they can spread out the words in their parts of the state. So one issue I had is how do we find poll workers? Again, the clerks have done a great job, but they need help. So we've done a lot through our office. We opened up a portal at govoteky.com and put out a request for volunteers. We also entered into a partnership with craft brewers around the state. They put special labels on their bottles and cans, encouraging people to volunteer to be poll workers. We've gotten over 1,000 just from that effort, primarily in places where those breweries are, which is urban counties, but that's where we need the most poll workers. So that worked out pretty well. We also worked out a deal with the Kentucky Bar Association. They would award continuing legal education credit to attorneys who volunteer to be poll workers. So we tried to do our part here and be be of assistance to the clerks on the ground level in trying to help find these clerks. But another challenge, of course, is informing voters. That's why we're talking about up to $1 million for advertising. It doesn't do any good to have all these great options for people if they don't know what they are. Back in the primary, we did the postcard, but that's really all we had the money for and the time for, even with a delay of 5 weeks of that primary election date. This time we've had more time to get ahead of the curve. And so my hope is that we'll have funding approved shortly, and then we'll put that into advertising. And it'll, I think, be a mix. It won't be my decision solely, but I'll be involved. I think it'll be a mix of newspapers and radio and maybe some TV and so forth. That's our hope. What we want to do, though, is we certainly want to inform voters about their option to vote absentee if they're of an age or health condition that they should, but also encourage early voting. I saw a poll last week. There was a poll. They tested, of course, the presidential race and the Senate race in Kentucky, but they also asked people, how do you intend to vote? That poll said 13% intended to vote early in person, a quarter intended to vote absentee, and 56% intended to vote in person on November 3rd. If that happens, we're going to have a crash. Some counties worse than others, but the system will break if we have 2 million people or even 1 million people try to vote in one 12-hour span on one day. That's unnecessary. That's why we're going out of our way to encourage people to vote in person early if they can. That's the leg of the system that's best able to withstand the surge of turnout that we're going to have in this election.
Good points. Thank you. We have time for one last question. Does anybody else have one last question? Am I missing anyone? Lots of folks.
Yeah, Michael, I don't understand why we would normally be voting in person. Why is in person create a surge now that will break the system? It wouldn't normally do that.
Well, normally it would result in people waiting in line for a long time. I waited in line 3.5 hours to vote for president in 2016, and that's with every single precinct in the state open. We're not going to have every precinct in the state open. A lot of our precincts are nursing homes. Again, we're not going to have enough poll workers for every single precinct. We're also not going to have enough locations for every single precinct. A lot of our locations are privately held, and these are rational people who don't want to take on an uninsured liability risk. So we're very reliant on schools and so forth, but we don't have a lot of other options beyond schools and other government buildings. So what that means is we're going to have, although a more robust in-person voting option on November 3rd, it won't be thousands of locations necessarily that we normally have. So plus you add to that, we got to keep people spaced apart in a way we didn't have to before. So that makes it logistically very difficult to put all those eggs in that one basket. Historically, we have 98% of our voters vote on one day in a 12-hour span. That's a little arbitrary. Hardly any other states do that. We set our election model back in the 19th century in an agrarian era that hasn't really kept up with modern reality. So I think we ought to have maybe some more options, generally speaking, but certainly we're just not in a position in this current circumstance to have everybody show up on one day and stand in line. It's just not feasible.
When you talk about breaking the system, you're not talking about the electronic overload or computer failures or something of that nature. You're just talking about the flat out logistics of people trying to be accommodated in this particular circumstance.
That's exactly right. Yeah, to be clear, the election is not going to literally break, but I don't want to have long lines of people getting sick.
Right.
Yes,
right. The only thing I question about that is that we've made a strong effort to, appears to me to be a strong effort to get out the vote early. Well, but do we really want people to vote before the presidential primaries? I mean, that seems to me like a watershed event that should be studied before anybody votes.
Did you mean the debates?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, look, here's what I tell people. If you don't know who you're going to vote for, please take your time, study up, do your research, make an informed decision. I don't want to press anyone to make a decision before they're comfortable, but I know who I'm going to vote for. I think the vast majority of voters are already opinionated and they know who they're going to vote for. So go ahead and vote. The sooner you vote, the sooner we'll be done with all this, especially with the absentee votes. If If people wait till the last minute, it's going to take longer, and it's going to be harder on the clerks to count all these if they all rush in at the end. If you know who you're going to vote for, go ahead and request your ballot and go ahead and get it in. My guess is 90% plus of the voters are already decided. That's typical in an election. Most people, they vote their party anyway. So people who are still making a decision, please take your time. I want people to be informed when they vote. But if you know who you're going to vote for, then just go ahead.
All right. Secretary Adams, thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. I know we've got county judges, magistrates, commissioners, county clerks. I think we've even got a sheriff and maybe a jailer PVA on. But thank you so much for speaking to our membership. They're the ones that on the front lines, working these elections, getting ready, getting prepared. But thank you and your office, your staff. They've been tremendous helping us coordinate your logistics today. So thanks for the job you're doing for the Commonwealth, and we look forward to talking to you again soon.
Thanks so much. See you all soon. Thank you.
Just a reminder before we transition to our next speaker to keep your microphones muted. You are doing a great job at that. I appreciate it. And check the chat if you want to type in any questions there or raise your hand when our next speaker after they are finished with their comments. But good questions, and I appreciate everybody's patience as we run through this. Our next speaker that we have with us, I want to make sure that we're ready to go. John, are we ready to go? So our next speaker, we're very pleased and appreciate the Executive Director of the State Board of Elections, Jarad Deering. Jarad was appointed in 2017, and he serves on the U.S. Elections Assistance Commission, attended the University of California, and served as a special chief of staff to then California Governor Jerry Brown, and was a policy advisor before that for Metro Council. And I know that there's some questions that are awaiting him when he's finished with his comments. But we appreciate him being on here, and we'll turn it over to Executive Director Deering.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it. I thought I'd do something a little bit different. I knew that Secretary Adams would be talking about the election specifics, and did a great job doing that and explaining kind of what we're doing. I'll also be able to answer questions about that if anyone has continued questions. But I thought I'd give a little look towards the future. Everyone's kind of buckled down right now with COVID and kind of the stress that's being put on us because of that. I'm more than happy to answer questions about this election, but I thought we'd talk about a little bit about what we're doing as we move forward past into 2021 and then ultimately into our next election cycle in 22. Let me start by saying, Judge Vocal, we are going to be sending out those checks, reimbursement checks this week. We actually cut checks on Monday to be able to send out for extra staffing needs. That was approximately $2 million that we cut checks for all the counties to be able to staff up for the election and make sure that our clerks have the resources they need to get through the processes we're asking them to do. But to your question specifically about the elections reimbursements, we've been kind of pushing back and forth between OMBD to get these allotment checks done, and they're being cut this week and should be out to you relatively soon.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. So let me kind of get into a little bit about what we're going to be talking about today. I know for a lot of my clerks here, this might be kind of old hat. You've heard this before, but I think it's important that all of our county officials have a basic understanding of what our elections are and what your responsibilities at the county level are, especially as we continue to move forward. So I want to give you a little bit of a contextual understanding of kind of what our funding streams are and what our guidelines and where they kind of come from. Most of them derive from what we call HAVA, which is the Help America Vote Act. HAVA was instituted by Congress in 2002. It was a reform made out of the election from Bush Gore and some of the inequities and concerns that the Congress and the general public saw during that election cycle. For the most part, it was an opportunity to update a lot of our election equipment and the standards we hold for elections. So some of the things that came out of this were provisional voting for all federal election races, voting information that would be centralized, updated and upgraded voting equipment, statewide voter registration databases that would be held at the state level. Here in Kentucky, we have a little bit of a hybrid system, which is the state holds in trust the election data, the voter registration system, and the county clerks are still the register of records. So there's still a checks and balance there where we distribute out the responsibility to the local jurisdictional level. We also have voter identification processes and administrative complaint procedures as well. Today, I'd like to focus on one, which is updated and upgrading voting equipment. So HAVA funded the majority of our counties, relatively. I think the first allotment went out in 2005, roughly. And so we're looking right now at about 15 plus years of that first tranche of funding going to the counties to replace the majority of our election equipment throughout the state. So when you calculate that back, the counties technically have not had to buy new election equipment for, in some cases, upwards of 30 plus years. And that is traditionally a responsibility of the county. Oftentimes the state will help that process, especially if there's a widespread need to be able to update that election equipment. But 15 years ago, it was the federal government that came in and purchased the majority of those upgraded election equipment. All that election equipment had to conform to what we call the VVSG, and that is an acronym for Voluntary Voting System Guidelines. There are a set of guidelines that control the standards to which the technical side of the equipment, the engineering side, the security side, the usability side, whether it's accessible, all those have federal standards. They are set up by the United States Standards Board, which I am a member of. And so this is kind of what at the crux of the background that I want to kind of share with you is specifically the VVSG. Because that VVSG was originally voted on more than 15 years ago and created. So you can imagine how many times your phone has changed in the last 15 years or your computer. So our election equipment has gone through the same types of iterations as well. And so the guidelines that govern the technology that run our elections were made 15 plus years ago. And so right now, the Standards Board and the United States Elections Assistance Commission is updating those guidelines, and they are going to be passing out the VVSG 2.0. So what does that mean at the county level, and what does that mean for you as county administrators? It means new standards and best practices. So the things that we thought were best practices in 2002 are in some cases outdated, right? Technology changes and the security standards and the accessibility standards that we hold have changed over those 15 years plus, and they were going to change when the VVSG 2.0 is also changed. So what does new standards and practices mean? Well, that means we're going to have to update and upgrade our voting equipment. So about a year and a half ago, the State Board of Elections voted to mandate that any purchase of election equipment had to be what we call voter verified paper audit trail systems. So hang on a second. Here we go. So what we call VVPAT. I know there's a lot of acronyms. I don't expect you to memorize all these, but voter verified paper audit trail systems is one of the main focus of both the VVSG 2.0 and the new standards and best practices that we see at a national level for voting equipment. So that means that no longer can you go in and just cast your ballot on a computer that then tallies that vote and then sends that vote digitally to the county clerk. And then that they upload as election results on election night. What we're looking at now is a hybrid system that allows voters to both use a digital system or a digital interface if they choose to for accessibility needs. But at the end of the day, that voter is going to be able to print out a ballot face, be able to look at it, review it, and determine that, yes, that's indeed who I cast my ballot for. And they're going to take that ballot and they're going to put it in a drop box. Most of the systems that we're running will put those through a scanner first, so it will digitally count that vote. But at the end of the day, there's a paper audit trail that as administrators, we can go back to if we have to have a recount or a recall, a recanvass or a recount. And that system is really important. So we had 27 counties that were running only non-VVPAT systems, and we've done a good job in the last year to update those counties. We've had some federal support, some state support that we provide to the counties, and we're also asking the counties to step in as well. So there are two main vendors that we are currently using in the state. One is ES&S, and they primarily use what we call the Express Vote system. That is a VVPAT compliant system. The second is Hart InterCivic voting equipment. They use the Verity voting system, which is also a VVPAT compliant system, and that is sold through Hart Enterprises, one of our other vendors in the state. So that's the end of my slide deck. But what I wanted to kind of sum that up, giving you a contextual background of how we are looking at election equipment moving forward. So the State Board of Elections took the step to decertify the ability for counties to purchase anything other than a VVPAT compliant system. In other states, they literally decertified every system in the state and required the counties to purchase all brand new systems. And we saw Virginia do that in a matter of months, in which they required the counties to update every single one of their voting systems. So that being said, it's not a step that we were prepared to take in the Commonwealth because I think it would put an undue burden on the counties and their ability to update these. But that day is coming. I can't give you a specific date, but what I can tell you is that either it is going to be put through the legislature. There were several bills in the last session that contemplated the idea of decertifying our election equipment that was not VVPAT compliant. I also know that at a federal level that there's been some question of putting out a new round of HAVA, and those HAVA dollars would probably come with a requirement to decertify non-VVPAT systems. So that is going to put a burden on the counties, and that's kind of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you briefly about that today, to kind of let you know where we are with that process and to let you start thinking forward in the idea of how we're going to start funding these. In my opinion, election funding, it should be a tripod. It should be a basis of federal funding, state funding, and local funding. Their 117.345 states that election costs are to be borne by the counties and all election costs are to be paid for at the counties, otherwise not declared in another statute. Now, the state, to Judge Vogel's question, the state does give you money. We reimburse you for precinct costs, we reimburse you for registration costs, and the federal government has come in with some periodic tranches of funding that they drop onto the state. I don't know if that necessarily is the best system that we currently have. I would like to see something more stable where both the state and the federal government can give us an explicit number that we can budget towards as local communities and as a state operation. But that's my goal as we start to move forward, is to identify funding for both you and your clerk partners. So one of the things that I think we can do is begin to lobby our state legislatures in informing them of the upcoming costs that are going to be associated with updating election equipment. Again, the counties and the state have not had to purchase election equipment on their own for almost 30 plus years. Now, some counties have gone above and beyond and have paid for out of their own budget, but most of the counties have not. So as we continue to move forward, I'd urge you to continue to educate your own legislators in your community so that when they go to the legislature in the next session, that there's some understanding of the needs that you will have. I'll also tell you that there are what we call CTCL grants that have been put out for counties. They're a grant that has been provided by Mark Zuckerberg. I have my own moral and ethical conflicts with taking money from Facebook, but those grants do exist and they are open to the counties. I know several counties in Kentucky have already applied for those and have been identified as recipients for those grants. It is a decent amount of money, so by all means, if you feel that's appropriate for your local community, feel free to reach out and we can help you through that process. That being said, open it up for questions.
Thank you, Director. Does anybody have any question they want to start us off with? I know he's already answered Judge Vogel's question. No, Mr. Derry, I'm sorry, did somebody else have one?
No, I was just gonna say, this is the first time I've been in a meeting with my clerks where they were all quiet.
Well, I know that you had testified. I watched you testify. I was there at the state fair in August. And I wondered if you had any particular questions that legislators asked you about at that point that come to mind.
Sure. I think one of the things that we really haven't talked enough about, and this will, hopefully it's part of educating the voters, educating our electors. But one of the questions that was asked is, can someone vote twice? What does that stop? What are our controls around mail? We hear a lot of disinformation and misinformation about mailed ballots and fraud when it comes to that. Voting fraud is real. It happens at a much lower rate and percentage than I think what people think it does, but it is absolutely real. Voter suppression is real, but it also happens at a much lower rate than we expect it does. And unfortunately, those two ideas and two values are being used as a cudgel to kind of beat us over the head right now. And it makes it harder for us to be able to point that out when it actually does happen and say that's voter fraud or that's voter suppression and is anathema to the democratic process. But one of the things that, I think it's important for voters to understand, as well as our legislators, are what are the security controls that we put on these systems. So if you were telling me that voter fraud by mail is rampant across the state and there's no way Kentucky can do this, I would tell you in 1990 that was probably the case. But now, today, and I think the clerks would also be able to tell you about the care that they take and put into this system, which is for the first time as a state entity, I have a ministerial ability to be able to view all of the absentee ballots that are coming in through the portal. We then print barcodes, which are then mailed to the counties to put on the envelopes as labels. They're mailed out to the voter. So I now know when the ballot is applied for. I know when the ballot label is printed. I know when the clerk puts it out. I know when the clerk mails it out. I then know when the voter mails it back or delivers it back to the clerk, because the clerks are scanning those back in. And I also know when that ballot is counted. So now we have a simple accounting process, which is no more ballots will be counted than applications. And I can track that through the entire system. Every single county clerk is evaluating signatures to be able to make sure that those ballots correspond with the voter that we sent them to, and that there's a control there. I know a lot of people have asked this question: why are we curing signatures? Why are we giving voters a second chance to be able to cast that ballot if they messed it up the first time? It's twofold. One, I don't think we would have survived challenge. No state has survived challenge for not having a signature cure for their absentee ballots or their mail ballots. But the more important factor from my perspective is it's actually a security control. If someone's taken the time to be able to apply for an absentee ballot, they've gone on the portal, they've filled that information out, they then got it in the mail, they filled it out, they took their time out to go drop it off or put it back in the mail, and that signature doesn't match, I want to know why. I want to know why that signature didn't match. And one of the best ways I have to be able to do that is to give that voter an opportunity to cure that signature. And if they don't cure that signature, those absentee ballots can now be evaluated. They can be sent to law enforcement, the Commonwealth Attorney, the Attorney General. And if there is election fraud, if someone has fraudulently taken someone's absentee ballot and signed it without that voter's knowledge, I want to be able to find out from that voter that, hey, no, I never did get my ballot. And, why are you now saying it had a wrong signature on it, right? For the most part, like I said, 99.9% of these are going to come back with a voter that says, oh, I'm now 85 and I signed my driver's license when I was 65 and my signature's a little different now. Or I was 18 when I registered and I'm now 22. And I'll tell you personally, I had someone call me and say, my signature didn't match because I have a grown-up signature now. And, I was excited to hear that for that person, but their signature was different, right? So for the most part, that process is a fair one because it's giving the voter an opportunity. We have voters that will spoil ballots in person all the time. Clerks will tell you that. We give them up to 3 different tries if they mess their ballot up in person. There's no reason why a voter shouldn't also have that ability if accidentally casting a ballot inappropriately by mail. But more importantly, I want to have that security control on the backside. Other questions?
Jarad? Jarad?
Yep.
Judge Vogel here again.
Yes, sir.
To monopolize all the questions, but Your picture just went off here on mine. I don't know if,
I'm still here.
okay. There on the internet, there is a discussion out there that has to do with the barcode.
Yeah.
And I don't know if I can hold this up or not, but they're showing this.
Gotcha.
These barcodes, they say, have a D or an R planted in them that identifies the voter as Democrat or Republican. Is that correct?
So here's the thing. In the primary election, as you all know, primary elections are closed elections, which means that they are specific to the party affiliation, and the voter has to be able to have that correct ballot that associates their party affiliation, correct? So in the general election, their ballots will not be going out with party affiliation. There's no need to, right? But during the primary election, the clerks had to have a way to be able to identify the correct ballot face. So while the outer envelope did not have party affiliation, the inner envelope did. So the one that the voters saw before they filled it out did have their party affiliation, but no one else was seeing that. And it was a way for the clerk to guarantee that voter was being assigned the correct ballot face. Because ultimately, you know, when we talk about voter disenfranchisement, the most common voter disenfranchisement we have is the voter not receiving the correct ballot face. And that's something that we take great care with. As a matter of fact, and I am incredibly appreciative of the effort of the county clerks. They just overhauled their ability to code their ballot faces, helping to guarantee and ensure voters will receive the correct ballot face. But like I said, in the primary, it was on there. It wasn't open to the public, but it did have to be on there because of the closed primary system we have.
So it won't be on there for the general, and
It will not.
Can't toss away a party he doesn't agree with.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
Not that they would anyway.
Thank you, Judge Vogel. That's a good question. Does anyone else have a question for the executive director?
Yes, I do.
I'm wondering if you
Go
could
right
go
ahead, please.
through that ballot process, that ballot coding process a little bit more, so people are more aware of the security that we have put in place, so nobody knows what kind of ballot people are doing.
Yeah.
Because we've actually had phone calls. I've had the news media reach out to me actually about that same exact thing. And I think the general public does need to understand that we did overhaul that system. We didn't have time in the primary to do that.
Yeah.
But we did this overhaul for this general election, and we can actually use that from now on out. It's
Yeah.
not that it's this election.
That's exactly right, Clerk Jones. I appreciate that. Listen, I know, the state board asks a lot of our clerks, and I know how incredibly stressed you guys all are with your own responsibilities that exceed just elections. We asked you to do this task, and everyone stood up. I think there was only 2 counties that said they weren't going to do it. But we are completely overhauled on that system. That system will now move forward with us as we move into new election cycles, and I think will only benefit both the clerks and the voters as we move into new election cycles.
Great question, Naomi. Thank you. Does anyone else have a question?
Yes, I do.
Go right ahead, please.
My name's Donnie Bush. I'm a Breathitt County magistrate, member of the fiscal court. And Mr. Deering was present at our court meeting yesterday. And we've had some conflicts with the county court clerk about the costs, election costs, and buying new updating machines. And we was personally told that if we didn't abide by what the clerk wanted, that our county would be placed under, in other words, the state would take over the elections. Could Mr. Deering elaborate more on that?
Sure, I'd love to. Thank you. So again, buying election equipment is to the discretion of the county. So during this last round, the ability of the state to be able to update election equipment with both federal funds and state funds due to the pandemic was a priority for us to make sure that the counties that were running non-VVPAT systems had that ability. We were able to buy at scale from our vendors because we were purchasing in a large amount, so which means it decreased the overall cost. We gave counties the ability to be able to also purchase the extra equipment they would need moving forward into the next election cycle. So we provided them a little less than 2/3 of their need, and their ability to be able to purchase equipment after that fact was something that we gave to the county as a responsibility. It's my understanding that Clerk Curtis applied to her fiscal court to be able to receive those funds, and the fiscal court denied her. At that point, that's out of my hands. I have nothing to do with that. However, what I will say is that Clerk Curtis is also requesting funding for her normal election processes, including $550 charge for individuals that were helping her with her last election and her staffing and her equipment transfer, and the fiscal court's denying her that reimbursement. So when I say that the counties have a responsibility under 117.345 to pay for their elections, that's exactly what I mean. And if the fiscal court is unwilling to pay for those, and I will say on a personal level, I've had to go to Breathitt County several times now to be able to explain to the fiscal court that you're not allowed to zero out your county clerk's election budget. That's a problem. Fundamentally, both from an administrative process and an elective process, I expect our counties to be able to put in their fair share and make sure that they're doing the things that they need to have successful elections. And as a state administrator, I am not going to allow a county, specifically the fiscal court, not to fully fund that election so that we can be successful.
Thank you, Squire. I appreciate that. Thank you all so much. I think that's something that we can work on going forward offline. Absolutely. Executive Director Deering, thank you so much for being here. That time flew past us. I appreciate all the information.
Thank you again.
Continue to share with our folks. And we'll put your presentation in an email after this that we'll send out to all of the folks that have registered. Appreciate the work that you're doing. Good luck in the next 5 weeks.
Thank you.
That you have remaining. And everybody else, we will take a quick 5-minute break for anybody that needs to return calls or do whatever else you need to do, and we'll get back on at 11:04.
Thanks again for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you. All right. I have 11:04 on my clock, so we'll pick back up. Again, I'll just encourage everybody to keep your microphones on mute, and we'll call on you as you have questions. And then make sure you stay on screen for your DLG credit when you can, when you're there. Just mute it if you need it, or keep it muted if you need to take a call, but if you can, to keep your screen on so we can keep an eye on that. Next, we have an excellent panel of fellow county officials for you all. I'm so appreciative of the time they are taking out this close to the election to be on here and to share what their experiences are right now, trying to abide by these new emergency regs and voter education, along with everything else that county clerks have to do. We're emphasizing today the elections portion of all of the hats that county clerks wear, but there's so much more that they also have to continue to do as they move forward this election season. And so we today have Tabatha Clemons from Grant County, who's in her second term. We have Jason Denny from Anderson County in his third full term as clerk. And we have Jeff Hancock from Franklin County. And then we also have Gabe Summe from Kenton County. And so as you can see from those folks, we've got a wide variety of size of county with their different populations, brings different challenges for all those folks. But we certainly appreciate them taking the time to be on here, and we'll get right into it. I'd like to start by asking each of you just to give everybody else on the call a brief overview of how you in particular are handling implementing the emergency regulations, what some of the challenges are for you, for your size county. And we'll start with Tabatha, if you could kick us off.
Sure. Thank you for having us today. So my name, as Shelley said, I'm Tabatha Clemons. I'm the Grant County Clerk. We have about 18,000 registered voters in Grant County. We are, taking the election day by day here. We're currently in the process of labeling all of our ballots for outgoing mail. We'll begin in-person early voting here October 13th and participate in the 3 Saturdays that we have to by the emergency regulation for early voting. We are having 4 vote centers in Grant County, which means that any voter in our county can go to whichever location they choose on election day or they can come to early voting. The electronic poll books have offered us the opportunity to be able to do this, and to be able to have voters select the way that they want to vote. While that is wonderful for voters, it presents challenges for county clerks. It is challenging to try to determine how many ballots we're going to need, because we don't exactly know, in a precinct, we can look and say, okay, there's 2,500 registered voters in this precinct with this many ballot styles. So if I can share with the magistrates and the judges that are on the call, you may see more cost being spent on ballots this election because of the vote centers that the emergency regulation has us adopting. That's something to keep in mind when you get your invoices from our vendors, is that we will see cost higher because of the vote centers. While it's wonderful for the public, there's consequences that we have to keep in mind, and that comes in the form of money a lot of times. So, in Grant County, in the primary, we sent out about 3,500 mail ballots, and that was a massive undertaking for our very small staff and the people that we brought in. However, this time we're seeing a decline in request. We're still seeing people request mail ballots more than what we normally see, but it's not like what we saw in the primary. I'm so thankful that we didn't send out a statewide postcard that confused voters on their options, that each county is getting the opportunity to advertise their plan as they see fit. However, keep in mind that with advertising these plans and it being different than what we're used to, there will be cost associated with that as well. So we applied for some grant funding through one of the organizations that Executive Director Deering spoke about, and are going to utilize some of that for advertising. But we hope to have a very successful election this season. And I just ask that you show some grace to your county clerks these days. We're not exactly ourselves in a lot of scenarios. A lot of times I compare elections to playing a basketball game. When the buzzer goes off, the game's over. And that's what an election is. There is no changing what's happened. It's not like an ordinance that we write and that gets drafted up and then we get to, see how it works and maybe we can go back and tweak it. You can't tweak anything after the election. When the buzzer goes off, that's it. There's only one shot to make sure that it's right. And it is very stressful, especially this time during the pandemic. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Tabatha. Appreciate it. Next, we'll go to Jason Denny, Anderson County. Jason, take it away.
Good morning. Appreciate everybody participating today. It is a little busy and hectic right now, but I am so glad to do this to get our message out and what we've been able to do here in Anderson County. We have approximately 18,700 voters. Based on numbers that we saw that we're anticipating, I think we're all thinking we may see a 70% turnout statewide average. Anderson County has always trended to higher than that. We've always been about 10% higher. We're anticipating an 80% turnout, which would be about 15,000 voters coming through the whole 19-day process. In the spring, we tried something new, which was a drive-through facility, letting voters remain in their car for those voters that are apprehensive. I think we all agree there's three different groups of people out there. There's those that are frightened to death of COVID. There's those that don't believe COVID even exists. And there's a group in the middle that are willing to do what it takes to keep everybody safe. And I feel like we have done that in Anderson County. There is the paper mail option that you can request a ballot by mail and totally vote that in the comfort and safety of your own home. Then we have the walk-in facility on election day that you can come in person. Then in the middle, we're utilizing a drive-through facility for our early voting. You can still vote your ballot in person. However, you are still staying in the safety of your own vehicle. So we're trying to give a mix of that. What we saw in the spring of all those people that voted in person whether it was early or on election day, 60% chose the drive-through option. It won't work in every county. We were lucky to find a facility. We're lucky that the city has offered a facility this fall, and we're going to expand from 1 lane to 4 lanes. What my fear was early on, I had too many paper absentee requests. What Tabatha just said is what I'm seeing. It's lower. That means the rest of the voters are going to be pushed to the next 2 options. Is that early or is that walk-in? What frightens me is too many wait till walk-in day. Now, I'm running numbers and I'm saying, okay, what if I have worst case scenario? 50% of my potential voters, 7,500 people, come in on election day. Half vote in one center, half vote in the other. I'm still okay. That's where we based it, worst case scenario. I am hoping that 50% of the potential voters vote early. That's where I'm putting all my emphasis. Digital signage, corrugated signage, Facebook, newspaper, word of mouth. Please vote in that first 18 days. We're giving you such flexibility there. Pick and choose your time to go vote, even on Saturdays. It's unprecedented in Kentucky to have every county offer Saturday voting hours, but we're doing that. So the options are there, and for the individual voter to say that they've been left out, I think that's hard. That's hard to comprehend when there's so many options. There are costs involved in this. However, we have chosen 2 voting centers on election day. Our cost of our ballots won't be up because of the voting centers. Our cost will be up because I chose to order 95% ballot turnout, and my board agreed with that. There's a lot of voters that will show up this election that haven't voted in years. There will be spoiled ballots. They will make a mistake. They will get a second one. They could make a mistake and get a third one. I've had to take that into consideration on what cush do we need. The one thing I don't want to do is run out of ballots and have to order more or print more ballots on election day. That is one thing I don't need to be worrying about. There are other fires that we're going to have to put out on election day, and those can be unanticipated. We may not know what those are right now, but ordering the ballots I don't want to be my problem. It is a small price to pay for keeping that problem away. I do see that we've definitely learned something through COVID. We've learned that we can, in a short time, pull off something that was probably thought to be impossible. I think we've all learned from each other. As clerks, we are always on the phone sharing ideas. What's good for one may not be good for another, but I have even sat thinking that we've got the best system, and I've sat and listened to the other clerks on the phone and go, ooh, we could even go better with that. And we've taken ideas from other clerks, and I have been willing to share ideas that we have made work in this election. I do feel that the voters have really latched on to the flexibility of voting centers in the future. I don't know where that legislation will go in hopefully the spring, but voters per se that had to drive from work all the way home have been able to vote really quick and stay in town. However, there may be times that we have to keep those remote locations open. I think we're going to have to look at our demographics and our voter needs in the future and reevaluate how we vote in Kentucky. You've got that group that does not trust the mail, but we've been so flexible to have these mailboxes that Jarad and the state board have purchased that are secure, that voters are able to drop their ballots off. So that it's kind of a hybrid. The flexibility is there. I know there's people that are fussing with the governor because he caved on this and fussing at the secretary because he caved on this. I don't call it caving. I think we're doing what's best for the voters and the integrity of the voting process right now in Kentucky. And we've all had to give a little bit and take a little bit. And I think we've done the best we can. I think the main thing is the integrity of the voting process in Kentucky is here. I can, my naysayer friends that say, I don't trust that paper mail-in ballot. I explained to them the process and the security measures that are in place and how I don't know how they vote. And once you explain that to most, they're going, oh, wow, it's that detailed. And so you're going to have naysayers on both sides. It's just you have to do the best you can. And I think here in Kentucky and Anderson County, we've done that.
Thank you, Jason, for those remarks. Next, we'll turn to the capital city, Franklin County Clerk and KCO board member, Jeff Hancock. Jeff, take it away.
Kelly, I appreciate you all having us today. I want to start by saying that thank you for having us. Jeff Hancock, Franklin County Clerk. To all the magistrates and judges out there, I want you to know that a majority of the success of the primary lies square on the back of your county clerk. So the next time you get the opportunity to stop in and say hello to them, do that because they're working hard every single day. Jason is 100% correct. We're bouncing ideas off each other. We're using the clerks as a network to make sure that positive results come out of this. Remember, in the last election, we have 50 days to establish a whole new perspective of how voting happened. We had a little bit more time this time around, but overall, we're adapting every single day. We're trying to find ways to make elections successful and fair for everyone, while we're also making sure that our doors are open and we're collecting tax dollars to make sure your doors can be open. We're working hard every day, and I'm very proud of the Clerks organization. The success from the primary comes squarely from the hard work of your county clerk and the county clerks surrounding that helped your clerk get through. And it hadn't come without a lot of complaining, a lot of fighting, a lot of back and forth. We're here every day working at it, and we're finding ways to be open. Most of the reason of any complaints that you've gotten out of your clerks is a lack of communication from the state level, from the board level. And that makes it hard for us to explain to you guys as the fiscal court how to help us, how to help us facilitate this, fund this, and get from point A to point B. So I'm sure we'll get into this in this in-depth question and answer session, but I want to say thank you for having us today. I look forward to any questions coming our way. I would really like to talk about the fact that funding this is fine now when we're in the COVID epidemic, but we are changing the process of the way your constituent wants to vote. So I hope we're ready to have a true conversation about what funding this for the future looks like and how we can expect to partner with the state and the federal government to get the equipment we need and the people we need to make elections successful. Thank you very much for having us, Shelley.
Thank you, Jeff, and thank you for your representation on the board, speaking up about this to the KCO board of directors each time that he has gotten the opportunity to do that at our meeting. So I appreciate his representation of the association and of the clerks. Next, we have Kenton County Clerk, Gabrielle Summe. Gabe, you want to take it away for us?
Again, thank you all for having us. This is Gabe Summe. I'm the Kenton County Clerk, and I am the third largest county in Kentucky. So my setup here is very different. And I do want to say hats off to all my other county clerks. They have done what is best for their county. And to say that, that's what I mean by every county has to be different. So that is because I know my county best, Jeff knows his, Tabatha, and Jason. So all of our plans, when we submitted them, were a little different. So I'm going to kind of just briefly talk about mine because it is quite different from others. And the reason that is I have 140,000 registered voters here. In the primary, I had 32,000 ballots that I sent out. I had one physical location. But for this general election, I'm currently at 14,000 requests. It has slowed down, but I kind of attribute that more to human nature. This portal is going to close on October the 9th. In the primary, I got 6,000 requests overnight. So I have a feeling that I'm going to have another spike towards the end of the closure or the closure for the portal on October 9th. That being said, per the regulations, will of course be open October 13th. I have 2 physical locations. I will have my Saturdays. I'm hoping that everyone realizes, regardless of COVID, that this is going to be long lines. This is a presidential election. It has nothing to do with COVID at this point. We also always have ballots that are super, super long. They have 2 constitutional amendments. One of them has 500 words on it. That means that people are going to walk into a facility, and unless they know exactly who they're voting for and what they're going to do, they're going to be there a while. So you're going to have lines no matter what. So I am trying to educate my voters to, one, use the whatever option is best for them, but the early voting, and to come at times that are not normally when they would. So early, traditionally, we have early morning rushes, lunchtime rushes, and then right before the end of the day. So by utilizing that, that's great. And my 2 early voting spots are going to be print on demand. So I was able to rent additional equipment. So anybody can go either to my Covington or Independence location, request a ballot. I'll be able to print that ballot exactly right there and then, and they're off to the races. But I can't accomplish that on election day. I don't have enough equipment. It would be too expensive and too chaotic for people to go to any more locations on election day because I have 57 different ballot bases. So to accomplish what I needed to on election day, I was able to look at how much equipment I needed because really, in honesty, we are putting on 3 major elections. There's a mail-in election, there's an early voting election, and then there's election day. So I had to look at what equipment I had. I had to reserve to accomplish the mail-in portion, how much equipment I was going to have to use or reserve for the walk-in. And that gave me what I was able to use for election day. And so I'm going to have 23 polling locations. This was done in conjunction with my County Board of Elections. Kudos to them. We spent 4 hours literally looking at every opportunity or every way that we could figure out the best way to open up locations. We considered population, we considered geography, we considered what we thought people would utilize in those areas. And we try to use already existing locations and then increase or add other people to them. I do not know what to anticipate. The hardest part of this is, will people vote by mail? Will people vote in advance? And what will election day look like? So you have to be prepared because there is no way to schedule when people are walking through the doors. So I'm preparing for about 80% turnout here in Kenton County. I've based all my numbers on that, my projections, and that will be a really interesting, well, it's nerve-wracking, that's all I can say, but it's also incredibly expensive for my county. My fiscal court has been awesome. They also have decided that instead of having a specific, or I should say a generic poster come from the state, we have done one specifically for our voters so that they have all the links they need to find all our locations and things specific to Kenton County. We, of course, have gone out for grants to be able to cover some of that cost of printing and postage. And but if not, the county thought it was important enough for us to be able to take care of that because we want people to vote and they need to be comfortable and it's a trust issue. They need to be able to trust what their county is doing to make sure the election works for them. So thank you again for your time and look forward to questions.
Thank you, Gabe. I appreciate that. Does anybody want to start us off with a question for any of our clerks on that panel? I've got a few questions for you all. Would anybody want to highlight maybe just a few of the more significant differences or changes in the regs between the primary and now what you're having to work with the general election emergency regs?
I'll jump in here. Basically, we are required to, well, there's some things that were in the regulations last time that are, of course, in this one, which allows us to drop boxes. It actually expanded some of that. Last time they weren't supposed to be outside This time they're allowed to be outside as long as they're under some kind of surveillance. So that gives people more options to drop things off, which is great. We are also required to have a super center on election day. As I stated, I can't accomplish a super center other than my 2 early voting, but on election day, I'll keep my office in Covington open. So if anybody is running late and they can't get back to their polling location, because I've designated my voters have to go to a specific spot to vote if they're going to vote on election day. So that being said, we are required to have a super center open on election day for voters. That's a little different. We also had to have our plans approved. We did need to have so many more polling locations available. There have been some other changes as to how we cure or how we look at ballots. We, of course, which are erring on the side of the voter. So there was a kind of a laundry list of things we needed to review. And those are the big touch points that were different from the primary.
Something that I'll highlight that's different just all the way around is the election results. So the secretary mentioned that it's as easy as pressing a button on the machines to get the results. It certainly is not that simple, but something that's different for all of us in Kentucky versus what we are accustomed to is on election night here in Grant County, which I'm sure it's this way across many of our counties. Election night, there's a recap sheet and people are getting that, or we're calling off numbers in our clerk's office, or they're displayed on a TV in the clerk's office so that you can see those election results. Those things will probably still happen this election. It's going to take more time. It is a presidential election. There will be lines at 6 p.m. So we're not going to be able to have, our poll workers bringing things back that quickly. And we've adjusted the way that we are doing that on election day to not have so many people coming back to one location to drop off the end of the night MBB data cards and all of those things. But the postmark requirements that the regulation has is very different from what we're used to with Kentucky law. So normally if there's a ballot after election day, it's not counted because it wasn't here by 6 p.m. on election day. That's not the case this time. So for those of you who, there's city council races on the ballot and close races in our communities that come down to just a handful of votes, those handful of postmarked ballots may make a difference this time. I don't think it'll make a huge difference in some of the larger races or the constitutional amendments, but when it comes to city council races and school board races, those are things that are going to need to be taken into consideration, not only by clerks, releasing our information on election night, but we need the media's help. We need our fiscal court's help. We need all of our county employees to really help share that message, whether that's on social media. Just because we have results on election night, that doesn't mean that it's the end this time.
I've got one thing here. I was looking at some of these questions, and last question was asked, since a voter can go to any polling location to vote, what safeguards are there in place to detect a voter voting at multiple polling locations on election day? I had a voter in the primary to assure his wife that he knew he could vote twice. So he came through the drive-through and voted. No, excuse me. He requested a paper ballot in the mail and voted it, and it come back. Then he comes through the drive-through with his wife while she voted, and he wanted to vote. And the e-poll books, the electronic poll book that we have in place now, automatically popped up. Already have received or is mailed an absentee ballot, etc. It will not let somebody vote twice. So in the old system where we had paper rosters, it would have been very difficult at best to have had voting centers. With the e-poll books, electronic poll books, they communicate with each other. So if a voter votes at the drive-through facility in my county and then drives a half a mile and goes and walks in on election day, it stops them dead in their tracks. They've already scanned could have scanned in their ID, or we could have put it in manually, and they've already signed in. It will not allow a voter to cast two ballots. Same way with, they can't if a voter requests an absentee ballot in the mail, they can't obtain, or a second ballot could not be counted for that voter the way the system is designed. The safeguards are in place.
Jason, I want to jump in there. One thing that a lot of times people get very leery of that technology about the safeguards that you're talking about. One thing that I pointed out to an individual who was here, I said, if you've been to, let's say that you go to a basketball game, whether that's a UK game, U of L game, go to NKU here in Northern Kentucky, where Gabe and I are, you have a ticket for the game, right? Whether that's a paper ticket or an electronic ticket on your phone, that is individually barcoded, and you go in and you scan your ticket. You can't turn around and then pass through the gate that ticket to somebody else. Each voter is coded that way in the system, so that when we check them in or they've requested a ballot, that's it. It picks them up. They can't be scanned again. So that's one of the analogies that I like to use when I'm talking to folks about those safeguards that you were just mentioning. Is it's a lot, you can compare that to something that they could experience.
Good points and a good question, Judge Lucas. Thanks for putting that in the chat for all of us to consider. Could one of you all talk a little bit more about, I know in the regs it talks about counties undertaking a good faith effort to cure all the absentee ballot irregularities. They talk about a letter, a generation of a letter, and then the ability to use email or telephone contact information. Could one of you maybe just go into that just briefly, just to educate the other non-clerk folks that are on here?
So in Grant County in the primary, we only had a handful, and by that I mean it was less than 40 ballots that actually needed to be contacted on. Something we've done for years here that's been included, and I know there's several other of my clerk friends. I learned this from another clerk. It's not like I invented this idea, but we just use a red X, a red Sharpie, and a sign here sticker everywhere they're supposed to sign. Some people have trouble and can't do that, and that's when we made the contact. I've been concerned about the letter being generated and want to, ask more questions about the letter being generated. Our processing committee and county board of elections, we're making those phone calls each day as we batch and process. At the end of the day, whatever we have that needs to be contacted, we put them in a separate location. Again, all of my stuff's color coded, so we go to the camo tote because we're having to track these people down and call them and ask about whether it's their signature, they missed a signature, whatever the case is. We're trying to track them down and get that taken care of as quickly as possible. I couldn't imagine in Kenton County what that looks like for Gabe. That's not possible. The letter's probably better for her. So, again, that's the unique thing about Kentucky. What works in one place isn't going to work someplace else.
Absolutely. And go ahead, Jeff. Did you want to speak to that?
Tabatha is 100% correct on that, because we had over 600 in Franklin County. We had 600 different cures that we had to make up, and we had to make a choice before the State Board of Election chose to do that, to allow my Franklin County Board of Elections to start making those calls. So we were making the calls from the local level well before the state ever sent out a letter and I can only imagine, Gabe, if I had 400, she probably had 4,000. So it'd be impossible for her to make all those phone calls. So it is definitely case by case. And once again, all the clerks across the state of Kentucky, if you ask them, they found a way to contact these people, whether it was through the State Board of Elections or whether it was through their local Board of Elections. So we just found creative ways to get a hold of the voter and find ways to cure all these ballots.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, the non-clerks that may not know, a letter gets generated by the State Board of Elections and mailed to the voter with instructions, And then the counties can also use any contact information if it's provided by the voter. But as you've already heard, the clerks are having to get very creative on how they attempt to do that. Gabe, you want to talk about how that worked for you in the primary and a little bit?
Well, in the primary, the cure signature information was in the regulations, but it wasn't very specific as to what cure meant. So in this current statute, it says if there's no signature on the outside of the envelope, it would be it wouldn't go any further, it would be rejected. So we followed that letter of the law. But that meant there was 1,900 ballots in Kenton County that didn't have any signatures on the outside. And that's why when the new working group got together, we suggested that we could look at more of a substantial compliance standard as it related to, because Kentucky is not built for mail-in absentees. That being said, you also have a lot of people who are voting by mail for the very first time, and there's a lot of steps to putting together a returned absentee ballot. So that being said, we've created videos, the instructions were redone. Still, people get confused. So we, in this current regulation, went through all the different scenarios as it related to, do we actually cure a signature that's missing versus a signature that is mismatched? We also said if the signature is not on the outside, we're not going to reject that automatically. As long as we have a signature, and maybe that signature is on the inside envelope, which is what they call the golden envelope or the privacy envelope, we will be able to check that against the voter's registration. So that gives that voter right off the bat a second look before we even have to potentially say we're going to reject it for there being no signature at all. So in Kenton County, even with all those scenarios that we worked through in the regulations, so we are, again, erring on the side of the voter before we ever say we need to reject it because there is something intrinsically wrong with it. I would have to go with the letter coming from the state. I just don't have the time or the staff, given the volume that we're producing on a daily basis and the volume that will be coming back. I'll have to rely on the state to send that letter, and hopefully that gets to them in a timely fashion. One of the confusions about that, though, is that's why we're encouraging people, get your ballot now and send it back ASAP. Because if we don't get it until close to the time, and there is an issue that needs to be cured, we're not going to have a whole lot of time to fix that issue for you. There's not going to be a whole lot of time for me to put it in the mail. And then if we get close enough, then that may be where I have to modify some of the way I function and be flexible and have us try to call people.
Thank you. Jason, did you want to make any comments on that topic?
We in the spring did everything possible. We sent out a notice internally from the office. If the voter put their phone number or email or contact information on the portal when they requested their ballot, we tried to contact. Staff even went as far as, if we didn't have any information that we could contact, we even utilized Messenger on Facebook. If they had a Facebook page, we contacted them that way. I guess the good thing in all this, we're seeing that I believe the absentee paper requests are going to be down. So this time, I don't believe we're going to see as many in Anderson County as we saw in the spring. That was really the worst part, in my opinion, of the absentee process. Once we got the flow going with mailing ballots out and checking them in, was the signature verification and what worked here and what worked there. In the past, we have seen, numbers in 300 or 400 ballots requested in Anderson County. You might have one or two that did not have a signature, and it was easy to determine that and get that done. When you see, like Tabatha said, I think we had somewhere, we're same size county, I think we had like that 40 to 60 range where we had to verify a signature. It was fairly easy. My circuit judge actually stepped in and wrote a recommendation, which we followed because it come from the circuit judge. If there was one signature, then we did this. If there was both signatures and couldn't reach the voter at that point, we couldn't count. We had, I don't think, even maybe one that we at the end we couldn't count because there was no way to contact that voter. So it's a small amount of voters that we're dealing with, and we're seeing where we're seeing the problem is voters that have never voted absentee before don't understand the process. It's an education thing. We have always highlighted the signature spots, which the reg requires this time. So we don't feel like in Anderson County the reg helped us there because we're already doing that for the voter.
Good points. And I put a link on the chat to the emergency regulations for anybody that wants to take a look at that, specifically about the ballot cure issue. That's on page 11 if anybody wants to take a look at those options that the clerks will have to follow for those cures. Talking about, educating the public and how to get the message out. I'm wondering from our panelists and any other clerk that's on here really, how can the county officials that are on here and all the county officials that are in the courthouse with you all spread the message that you all are trying to share to get the education message out? I know when Lynn and when Gabe testified in August before our legislative committee, Lynn talked about physically printing flyers for Spencer County voters to try to share those and spread those out in her smaller county. But just curious if you all could speak to the fiscal court members and the other elected officials who are non-clerks who are on here, how they can help you all, how they can help get those messages out to the voting public.
Shelley,
I'm going to jump in real quick. My biggest thing with sorry, Jeff.
I know my place.
No, you don't. But anyway, basically, we just ask our fiscal courts. Everybody's got friends. Everybody's got broadcast emails. And all of us are doing this. It just depends on the scale, but we have all created and become graphic designers in our spare time. I have to give a shout out to Tabatha. She produces some fabulous stuff that we all copy. And what that is we then can put that in emails. I send it to school boards, my superintendent. I say, send it to your family groups. I say, send it to your teachers and ask them to pass it on. I sent it to anybody I can think of in an email and say, please share in your media. Please do this. Please do that. That's, of course, the cheapest way to do it. And we ask the same of the fiscal court. Please help us through whatever venue you have available to you to spread the word about your specific county plan so that everybody is in the know. Your turn, Jeff.
I'm good. I think you just did it. It's all good. The one thing, Shelley, that I think that we need to make sure that we're emphasizing when we're having this conversation is, as the magistrates and the judges, they have an audience. And if they can get out to their audience through their Facebook, through their social media, through any means, their email chains, they have a lot of different ways. If they can understand, and they really need to understand our platforms and where we're putting these vote centers, why we're putting where we're putting them, how we're doing it for the convenience, how we're communicating on our early voting, where our early voting locations are, what hours they are. If they can help us with that, the message gets out there. I mean, there's not one magistrate in Franklin County that doesn't have the attention of all of their Facebook, of all of their email chains, of all of their church groups that are in their areas. If they can help us with that, this message will go far and quick. Social media changed the game. Elections have changed. Gabe has said more than once that we're not set up for mailing elections. Well, we are now. They didn't give us a choice. We have to change. We are running 3 major elections, and anything that your magistrates and the court can do to help us communicate that is just, it's invaluable.
I've reached out to all my taxing districts. They all have Facebook pages and websites, and share that information, and they've all done it. The school board shared it on their page. So just continually reaching out to your groups. my Chamber of Commerce is putting stuff on weekly on their newsletter. I really am a big proponent of the digital signs. We got so many people talking about our digital signs in the spring. If your road department has digital signs that you can borrow for a week or two right now, don't wait till the 13th. Right now, give them the options early and utilize those. We're moving those around town. I've found drive-throughs like our least famous recipe is there with McDonald's, and it's a great area. We put it there. We've located them at Walmart at times, out on 127. Digital signage has really worked for us. And Facebook, hey, I'm not an actor. I do Facebook videos impromptu. It's not totally professional, but I'm gonna tell you, so many likes and so many hits. People, they'll see a face, they'll listen before they'll read. So if you can get your face out in front of people, this ugly mug's not great, but it has worked in the past. And I'm starting to do more Facebook videos and begging your friends to share. Just because you read it, you're the only one reading it. Share it to your friends, and then they'll share it to their friends. That's how we're getting it out there. Newspapers, okay. Some people still see that. That's great. You've got to hit that group. So, because, you know, my dad reads the newspaper from front to back. He's going to see that ad in the newspaper. But the new generation sees it a different way. I am using some radio on a limited basis. It's not that costly. It has helped. There's a lot of people staying at home now. They're not working. They have the radio tuned in all day long. The listeners are listening all day long. So just every way just anything imaginable. If you reach 2 or 3 people and they tell 2 or 3, the word of mouth is the best avenue we have.
So one thing that I've asked of our community, and especially of our faith-based community, has been that any of the robocalls that our faith-based community is doing right now. So if you are involved in a church group yourself, as you know, and you're serving your community in an elected position, help us reach the faith-based community by allowing us to put information in your bulletins, whether that's our flyer. That's one thing that we've done here that's been successful. A lot of our church groups right now, for our voters who are not attending church, they're still, watching from home or whatever, they're doing some monthly mailings. So we've included some of our things there. The other thing that's hopefully going to be really successful for us this election is that each one of our utility providers in our community has agreed to put information on our utility bills or stuff information in the utility bills. So I'm not paying for a direct postcard to go out to voters. I've included information on the utility bills to try to hope that, we'll get some registrations off of there, but then we're also providing the same consistent information. And that's the part that I want to hit on. It's great for you to type up your own post, but if something is incorrect, just one little thing, like one date, people are extremely critical right now of all of us as elected officials. It doesn't matter whether you're a magistrate, judge, clerk, president, governor, it doesn't matter. People are extremely critical right now. And I don't know any way to change society's viewpoint of us, but the one thing that you can do is you can consistently share the information from your clerk. So whether that means hit the share button and share it, or go get the flyer yourself from your clerk and make sure that you have that, or ask your clerk to email it to you. But it is, I have really great magistrates here. I have really great judge executive here. I'm very, very fortunate. And they understand that consistency is key. But one little wrong mistake and you could have disenfranchised somebody from voting. For example, October 9th is the deadline for us to be able to accept requests from voters to cast an absentee mail ballot. If you happen to put October 19th instead of 9th because you were hurrying up and you're typing on your little phone, that's a mistake that we can't go back on. So it's important that our messages are clear and concise from each of our communities. So.
I have a question in the chat. Is there a generic copy of something we can share that will be the same across all counties that we can share out with our influencer groups? I would guess that's something that you could probably work with your individual county clerk. But if any of the clerks on here know of something, you email it to me and we'll put that in the post-session email to go out to everyone and figure out a way to post that more broadly. Any other questions? Real quickly, before we end, I would like to take a quick look forward. I'm glad we got all the questions, but I think just quickly looking forward, of course, no elections next year in 2021, so you all get to take the year off. Yay, I know. I know there are some things that maybe happened in past sessions that didn't pass, or maybe some things that you all are contemplating for the future. Maybe there's some things in the regs that you think would be positive to make actual law. Maybe there are some things that are not positive for counties and clerks that are in the regs that don't need to go forward in legislation. So I don't know if any of the four of you, all of our panelists, want to speak to any of that just real quickly before we get off of here, but trying to take a look forward on legislation, funding. Of course, we'll have to start talking to our legislators about that funding piece that Jeff alluded to as well.
I would love to see legislation that, and we're going to have to sit down. Everything won't work for big counties and small counties alike. But see legislation that allows some sort of flexibility for our local county boards, knowing our demographic, our individual voters, their needs. Currently 12 of my 14 precincts are already in schools. If we have some sort of vote center legislation, we can, I don't need 4 sheriffs of the votes of the precincts. I need 1 for each location. We're seeing shortages of election officers statewide. There's a lot of ideas out there that we can save on election officer cost, move people around, give convenience to voters, and like I say, keep the integrity of the voting process. And I think we're all going to have to, the cost is a big thing. We're all looking at replacing equipment soon. I think most of our equipment in Anderson County is 12, not 14 years old. It's past its life expectancy. We're looking at avenues now through the court a fiscal court to buy new equipment. But if legislation changes, we can reduce the cost of some of that equipment. We won't need as many scanners in some reason. We can save money. So we're really going to have to get busy with legislation in the 2021 session, because we've got time to get equipment bought and get trained on it before the 2022 election. None of us want to put new equipment in without good training on a countywide race coming up in 2022. And the last thing I'm going to say, I'm going to share this from a good friend of mine. County clerks do a really good job at this. We do not plagiarize each other. We rip off and duplicate.
Thank you, Jason. Jeff, I know, were you trying to jump in there real quick?
Yeah, I think the big thing that we're going to really have to look at, and it's going to have to be a team effort, and Jason alluded to it, it's funding. We have changed what elections look like. Let's face it. The constituent, the voter, no longer wants to vote in 12 hours. They want 156 hours like we're offering them this year. And this will all fall on deaf ears when COVID is no longer existing, because no one will want to fund this election process. No one will want to come up with the money. The voter will expect the same resources, but no one will want to fund this. So I hope that us, when I say us, I'm talking about CACO, I'm talking about the magistrate, I'm talking about the fiscal courts, can go have a real talk, a real conversation about what it takes to fund an election and what we can do to not only fund the election, but also fund the equipment. So my biggest thing, Shelley, if we really have to have a conversation about something, it's going to be funding of the 2022 election is going to be really important, because we're all on that ballot and people are going to expect the same things they got with the presidential with the local election. So let's not let good things that have come out of COVID fall apart after the fact. Let's find ways to fund them. Let's fund them together. Let's ask the people that are making the regulations, the state and the federal government, to step to the table and fund the process. Because right now we're the only folks around that we're doing all the work. The fiscal court's paying all the bills, and the state's making all the rules. So let's fund it and let's be able to do it together. That way we can fully fund it and make it work well. Thank you for having us, Shelley.
Oh, that's all good points. All good points. Gabe, did you have any last comments there on anything?
Just going to say amen to what Jason said and amen to what Jeff said. It couldn't have been better. And again, a longer conversation and really detailed conversation really needs to be had. And again, thank you so much for having us.
Well, I want to thank the four of you all for taking the time to be here, and all of you being on the call today, especially the clerks. I appreciate everybody that signs on for a KLI class. I know I miss having our conferences in person, getting to see you all in person and catch up with everybody and have those hallway conversations where I continue to learn so much about the jobs that you all do, the challenges that everybody faces in county government today. But I really appreciate the time. Clerks, good luck in the next 40 days and 40 nights as you pretty much live and breathe where you're at right now, where we see all of you all. I hope that Keiko can continue to be a resource for everyone. And we are recording this, so we will have it posted for others. It's just a really important topic. We hope that more people in county government will get educated. More non-clerks will watch this and have conversations with their clerks to see how they can be of more assistance as our clerks and their amazing staffs. We can't forget the staffs that work with you all to get this off the ground and to keep the integrity of the vote in place and safe and ready to go when people need it. But thank you again for everything everybody did. We'll send out a newsletter every Friday. I hope everybody continues to get that with upcoming events and news from the week. It's a good way for you all to stay in touch. So if you're not getting that on Fridays, please email us and let us know. And just to plug really quickly for our annual conference, it's going to be all virtual this year and open to all county officials for House Bill 810 training hours. A lot of great presenters. It's October 28th through the 30th. Those dates have not changed. That registration will open soon, but we hope to see a lot of you all on that. And anything else y'all think about, email me, let me know. But again, thanks for the job everybody on this call does. Everybody's got a tough one in public service these days, and we just hope we're a resource for all of you all. And I look forward to seeing all of you in person really soon. So thanks.
Hey, Shelley.
Yes.
I think we need more of these. I think when clerks can talk to judges and magistrates, not just Jeff Hancock talking to his judge and magistrate, they hear it from a different perspective. They don't just say it's their clerk doing this. It's all clerks are needing this. It's all PVAs need this for their office. It's all magistrates need to, well, I need to understand it from a magisterial standpoint as well. I was a magistrate, so I understand it a little bit. But I think we can see each other's perspectives, and this may be a great opportunity even after COVID that we can get together at times like this with different perspectives and come up and talk one-on-one.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of Zoom. That's one of the silver linings on the very large COVID cloud is that when we can all come in, make somebody driving all the way from Fulton County to come to Frankfort or from Pike County to drive all the way here to get together. This allows us to do that, Jason. That's a great point. So I think this is certainly the way of the future. But I do miss seeing everybody in person. So thank you all again. Thanks to our presenters and good luck with everything and enjoy your day.
Thank you.